The argument ended an hour ago, maybe 3 hours ago. You have moved on, or you thought you had. And then, without warning, the perfect response arrives. The exact words you should have said. The precise point that would have landed perfectly, that would have ended the whole thing cleanly, that would have made your position undeniable. It arrives fully formed, vivid, and completely useless, because the moment it was needed is gone. This experience is so universal that the French gave it a name: l'esprit de l'escalier, the spirit of the staircase, the wit you find on the way out, the perfect thing you think of while walking down the stairs after leaving the party, or the meeting, or the confrontation. The observation that came one beat too late. But why does it come at all? And why does it always come after? If your brain is capable of generating that response, why couldn't it generate it during the conversation, when it would have actually mattered? The answer is not that your brain was lazy or unprepared, or that you are simply not quick enough. The answer is that during a real argument or confrontation, your brain is running an entirely different program than the one it runs afterward. And those two programs are optimized for completely different things. When you are in a tense conversation, your brain activates the stress response. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. The amygdala, your brain's primary threat detection structure, goes into high alert. Heart rate increases. Breathing shallows. Attention narrows. This is the physiological signature of acute social threat, and it is not subtle. Your brain, in that moment, is treating the argument the way it evolved to treat any threat, as something that requires immediate action. The problem is that immediate action and precise verbal articulation are competing demands on the same cognitive resources. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's research on ego depletion and cognitive load showed that stress systematically narrows the scope of what the brain can process at any given moment. Under threat, attention contracts. The working memory system, which is where complex thought, language formulation, and strategic reasoning happen, gets compressed. You have less cognitive bandwidth available precisely when you need the most. This is why arguments feel like they happen too fast. Not because they objectively do, but because your threat-activated brain is burning so much of its available processing power on monitoring the other person's body language, managing your own emotional state, tracking the conversation history, and preparing a defensive response, that the higher-order creative work of constructing an elegant, precise, and devastating reply simply does not get the resources it needs. The brain is triaging, and verbal brilliance does not make the triage cut when survival feels like it is on the line. And then the argument ends. The threat dissipates. Cortisol drops. The amygdala downregulates. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of complex reasoning, language, and strategic thought, comes back online fully. Your working memory expands back to its normal capacity. And suddenly, you have all the cognitive space you were denied during the confrontation itself. Now your brain can do what it does best. Not react, but analyze. It replays the conversation, which, as we have seen in other contexts, the social brain does automatically with any unresolved interaction. It considers what was said, what was implied, what the other person's real argument was beneath the surface argument they were making. And with the threat gone and the full resources of the prefrontal cortex available, it generates the response that the situation actually called for. The response your fight or flight brain was too busy surviving to produce in real time. There is also a retrieval dimension to this. Human memory is not a recording. It is a reconstructive process, and reconstruction takes time. During a fast-moving argument, the relevant memories, the counterexamples, the relevant facts, the precise wording of something the other person said last week that directly contradicts what they are saying now, are not instantly accessible. The brain needs time to search. Retrieval is a process, not a lookup. And under stress, with working memory already compressed, that search process is even slower and less reliable than usual. After the conversation ends, especially during the transition to rest or low-demand activity, the default mode network activates. This is the brain's resting state system, which, as research by neuroscientist Marcus Raichle at Washington University has shown, defaults specifically to social cognition, replaying interactions, imagining alternative scenarios, modeling other people's mental states. The default mode network is doing the cognitive work that the confrontation did not leave time for. It searches through memory, constructs alternative versions of the exchange, and surfaces the insight that did not arrive during the conversation itself. The perfect comeback is not generated out of nowhere. It is generated by a brain that has finally been given the time, the safety, and the cognitive resources to think clearly. The question is not why it comes late. The question is why we expect it to come on time, given everything the brain was being asked to do simultaneously during the argument itself. There is a reason that professional negotiators, trial lawyers, and experienced debaters do not rely on in-the-moment brilliance. They prepare extensively. They anticipate arguments and construct responses in advance, in low-threat environments, using exactly the kind of deliberate prefrontal processing that goes offline under stress. They are essentially doing beforehand what your brain tries to do afterward. The perfect comeback is a process, not a flash of inspiration. And processes need time. The concept that captures this most precisely is what psychologist Daniel Kahneman described as the difference between fast thinking and slow thinking. Fast thinking is automatic, intuitive, rapid, and highly context-dependent. It is what runs during a heated argument. Slow thinking is deliberate, effortful, and capable of complex synthesis. It is what runs when the threat is gone and the prefrontal cortex has room to work. The perfect comeback is a product of slow thinking. Arguments happen in fast thinking time. The two are not synchronized, and they never were. There is something worth acknowledging here that goes beyond the cognitive mechanics. The arrival of the perfect comeback after the fact is also, in part, a function of changed emotional state. During the argument, your emotional investment in winning, in being right, and not being hurt or diminished, is very high. That emotional charge is itself a cognitive load. It competes with the clear-eyed analysis that would produce the most precise and effective response. After the argument, when the emotional charge has dissipated somewhat, you are no longer trying to win. You are simply thinking. And thinking without the urgency of winning is a fundamentally different cognitive task. Calmer, wider, more accurate. The bittersweet quality of l'esprit de l'escalier is real. There is something genuinely frustrating about a brain that produces its best work after the deadline. But it is worth understanding what that frustration is actually pointing at. It is not pointing at a flaw. It is pointing at the gap between what a brain under threat can do and what a brain at rest can do. And that gap is enormous, consistent, and has been known to science for decades. The next time you are in a situation where a precise, intelligent response matters, the most useful thing you can do is not try harder to think faster in the moment. It is to give yourself time before responding. A pause, a breath, a night. Not because you are slow, but because you are a human brain, and human brains do their best thinking when the threat is past and the prefrontal cortex has come fully back online. The perfect comeback arrives late because your brain needed time to finish the thought. That is not a failure of intelligence. It is intelligence doing exactly what it does, on the timeline it actually requires. The staircase is not where you failed. The staircase is where your brain finally had room to think.